that with Dr. Malafia here. You began with, you concluded with education of girl child. And that caught my attention because the African Union has had this policy on, actually, yeah, this year, they have come up with ensuring that they've come up with a campaign to stop early child marriages. And this is the hindrance of child education, girl child education. Now, I would want you to pick on that and explain it just a little bit more on how that affects the social policy welfare we're talking about. How do we deal with that? How do we ensure that nations actually will be able to oblige? Or did we just sign another paper that will be eventually say, well, you know, according to culture, you are 15 years, you're ready for marriage, which is also related to gender. How do you mainstream that gender into social protection? And, you know, how do you bring the gender aspect you were talking about into social protection? Now, Ambassador, you have talked at length on the issue of international agreements. At one point, I almost stood up my chair to say, Ambassador, would you be able to tell us exactly how this is a crisis? Picking on my love, he says, let me just actually try to get your correct word. Social policy is in crisis. Ambassador, I think the embassy, US diplomats have a major role to play in that. And I noticed my brother from the Embassy of Nigeria. I will want you to add on to that. The role of the embassies, the role of national embassies in advising national institutions, your parliaments, your line ministries. How do they get involved in ensuring that these do not end on paper? You talked about EDF. How do we get there? And we're having now today private sector meeting happening at the same time with our meeting today. And obviously there are decisions that are taking place that could be, could influence, could have monumental impact on our countries. That would be question 2. Now let me open the floor. If somebody has a question for any of these presenters. Yeah, Dr. Pendo will take the floor.
Thank you, Doreen. Hi, Excellencies. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to be here. So, you're hearing from somebody who is not necessarily does not understand much about the social welfare story. So I'm going to ask a very basic question. When we are talking about social welfare policy, and thank you for the presentation. I think I was very happy to hear your presentation. Megan, sorry, I don't know what I called you. Megan. We're talking about social welfare policy reforms. On the one hand, we heard all these problems that we have there, the MDGs, no poverty, etc., etc. On the other hand, we have a lot of policies going on. Now, I hear integration, I hear holistic approach. What exactly are you saying? We have all of these MDGs which have not been respected. We have poverty ongoing, we have everything ongoing. Some MDGs have come through, yes. But this is our context. This is the context from which we are speaking about. So what are we talking about? On the other hand, we're signing policies internationally. So what exactly are we doing? What do we want to achieve? My question is, we've got policy on the one hand, but I would like to speak to somebody who's working on the ground as well, in terms of social welfare systems. And they do exist. We have Rwanda, we have Burundi, we had some in I think West African countries. I think in Tanzania there's also health mutuality starting. So I think these are more practical examples for us to start looking at as a way to address all of these issues that we have here. Policy is good. A lot of us are working on policy on papers. I think the transformation has to happen. During what you're saying about learning from each other, I believe the learning has to happen in terms of social systems, in terms of what exactly are you doing? Because the papers we can sign, and Lord knows we're signing every day a new paper, but what's happening to the paper? When we come home from this meeting, I'll ask Collins, what's happening to the time we spent here? What happens to the output here? What are you getting here? You know, so what are we trying to achieve? That's my first question. And how can we learn from the actual work in terms of social welfare systems that have worked? Doreen, if you're looking for exchange of information, policy is one thing, we can learn this from a global level, but actual action on the ground, you know, from different African, Caribbean, Pacific countries with similarities. Because we can talk the theory. Everything that has been theoretically presented is excellent, absolutely. But we need to walk the talk, and this is what we're not doing, you know. And I have another thing. On this, for example, we talk about, we go back to these big policies which are going to be touching a lot of these developing countries. 11th EDF, post-2015. You know, these are things we're working with daily. Dr. Marafi knows because I'm working in the same office as him. You know, he's my big boss. So the question is, when we say we want policies, or we want social welfare to be taken or integrated, what exactly are we saying? What exactly do we want? Because all of this can be, these words, social welfare, can appear in the 11th EDF. The word poverty, gender can appear in the post-2015 agenda. But then what are we saying exactly we want at the national level? What is it exactly we want? Because we get caught up often in regurgitating words. We read EU policies, we use the same word. We want, how do you say, better jobs, you know, but what does it mean, better job? When your job is in the farm and agriculture in Africa, we can sit here in Europe and say, I want a better job. I've got a social security system. The person down there doesn't have one. So what are we talking about? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. And in fact, I hear the emphasis of exactly what we're about to tackle here. How do we turn those into practical ways other than the theoretical perfect paper that has been drawn up? And this is where I want the role of the embassies to come out really clearly. Because if we are attending all these meetings and we advise our nations with the same big words, you know, we've lost them. How many of us actually know parliaments at home when they read a paper and they realize it's too much, it's too, and it doesn't break down. So you as a diplomat here have got the role of breaking that down. What does that mean to actually translate these agreements we have? Yes, indeed, we have had all these agreements. We have had we've had all these presentations, but indeed, girl child education, what do we mean? What are the initiatives on ground? And in fact, that's why I was talking of the best policy approach. What do they do in Mauritius that South Africa has borrowed? What is South Africa doing that Botswana is borrowing? For instance, Botswana has a lot of grassroots approach on everything. That national development plan is actually from a grassroots level. It's not just done from the top, bottom, but actually from the bottom to up. That's an example of a country that is making policies, passing policies to their grassroots person, that the person understands my country is signing an agreement with the EU on veterinary issues. They understand what that means. Not that my country is getting money from the EU and you stop there, but what do we get out of it? So this is what I want our diplomats to address today. Move away from that paper and tell us, what role are we going to play in translating that? In merging those policies we've had from the UK. How do we just talk about the UK and their policies are functioning well, but we cannot do it in Kenya, for instance? But yet we tell them that the President of Kenya and the Prime Minister of UK have met on that item and they've assigned something, but we don't know what it is. Let me give the floor to
someone who is dealing with grassroots, and she has attended a lot of meetings like these policy welfare reforms. Maybe she can help us in that one.
Yes, we'll give her the time to speak. I don't know if we want to take that comment before you answer.
Yes.
Would you want to do it? Okay, sure.
Well, coming from the private sector perspective and also from different fields, I would say we should be meeting, talking about how we can do things, how the implementation can be done. If you talk about policies, we all know what has been happening. We have all the papers on the shelves, and signs and agreements have been done. I think from this meeting we should be having recommendations plus a way forward how to do the things. And this is what we're coming from. I would give an suggestion because I move forward. I'm not supposed to wait to see what they do. These are suggestions to the embassies, that we have a strategic committee or a plan that deals directly monitoring, implementing, monitoring the programs which have been put on the shelves in the social policy, having a time frame. This is another thing. a time frame is the most crucial thing in the implementation of all these policies, because we can have a policy which can go for 20 years, can go 30 years, can go 50 years, but also have an engagement, a commitment of each government embassy versus ACP, or this, a partnership agreement which shows it trickles down to each country to the national, to the ministry to the ground level. And unfortunately, the social welfare has been pinched in most of the countries, in African countries, in a ministerial, which has got gender, social, youth, all together. So it's all in a basket where it is not properly seen. It cannot be implemented. It can be mixed up with the social, women, youth, and others. Then last, I would say, we need to have initiatives. We need to have pilot programs whereby we create an awareness of each nationality which comes from after the signing. I'm talking about that after the signing. I'm talking about implementation. I'm not talking about the past, because all the paperwork has been done, the studies have been done, the consultancy has been done, research has been done. But now I'm talking about how we move forward with the paper which has been already on the desk, which we have already. So now we need to create awareness. Awareness is not created by talking. There's a lot of training should be going around to the policymakers, to the government, to the politicians, to all this we're talking about, all the key players, so that we know what we are talking about. Maybe we are missing that element. Yeah. We can be talking about social policy, but maybe trickling down, they don't understand what's the social policy at the end of the day. This is all I'm looking at. I'll come more when we have time to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.
The girl child, I think we're all agreed, is very important. There's got to be a special focus on that, because a lot of aspects of our culture are still such that they give more premium to the boy rather than the girl. And this issue of early marriage is still there in a lot of societies. I think we need a double-pronged approach. Issue of awareness, as you've mentioned, it is very important. Campaign, social awareness, public communication, persuasion, using film, media, and others to show why it's important, not to go into early marriage. Then provide incentives. I find that incentives work quite well. If you design some sort of incentive systems that will reward parents that make sure that their girl child goes to school rather than just get married. And as society improves and progresses, you eventually have to go down the route of legislation. Eventually, you have to end up with some kind of legislation that will say, look, this is the proper age that every child, well, don't even talk about the marriage, because some people will get very edgy. Just say that a child must be in school until a certain age. If you say a child must be in school up to the age of 16, and that is the law, that is the way to happen. I can tell you in Nigeria, and I'm sorry to give the example of Nigeria, which is a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society. When that debate came up in Parliament, some guys, very self-centered people, it was about the case of a senator, a very wealthy senator, who went to Egypt and married a 14-year-old girl from a peasant, completely illiterate family, and married her and paid a dowry of $100,000 for her, and then brought her back to Nigeria. And it raised a lot of alarm. And he said, no, Islam allows it. Islam doesn't have a cutoff point. So it now became a debate about religion rather than a debate about child abuse, about the ethics of, literally condemning the life of a 14-year-old. So we should move, so the debate is very complicated. Legislation can be put and say, look, no child in the country should be outside school until the age of 16. That will take care of the issue of early marriage and also save them from a lot of other problems, health problems that come up later. I think gender mainstreaming, that is very possible. It's not. I think a lot of success is being registered there. Some of the microfinance banks that are coming up, especially those supported by the government, they make it a special point, especially including the World Bank, IFC. They've designed financial packages for women only. There are those for everybody, but they've designed some for women only in agriculture, in artisanal works, in small-scale industries, and so on and so forth. I think that is a form of women empowerment and mainstreaming. And also, in the budgetary process that happens in our countries, we can always insist that if the budget cannot be finalized until the government can demonstrate what is being done inside the budget to improve the condition of women, and to empower women to be able to participate effectively. And I also agree with having pilot program, and I think Pendo also made that important point. What can we learn? What is the aspect of learning? And I think Doreen, you also made that point. And learning is extremely important. This is something that we tend to neglect. For example, in the 80s, when during the time of Moi in Kenya, Kenya was literally cut off from the international development community. For over 10 years, they refused to give even a single dollar to Kenya. What Moi did was he increased the extractive capacity of the state. That is the ability of the state to collect taxes. And the Nairobi Municipal Authority became the most efficient agency for tax collection in the whole of Africa. And you will agree with me that taxes are good for democracy. Because if, like our country, we just collect money from oil, so who cares, all right? But if you collect people's taxes, they want to know what is happening to their taxes. So it reinforces legitimacy, it reinforces accountability. This is one area where Kenya is very good at. Kenya can share that experience with Tanzania, with Nigeria, with other countries. In other areas where, for example, in social policy and social mobilization and grassroots, where Tanzania has been very good, it can share those lessons with Kenya. So across our various countries, there are always areas where people are better than. Rwanda today is probably the best country in Africa in terms of women's mobilization and empowerment, followed by Uganda. They've done extremely well here. In fact, in Rwanda, members of parliament, the women are like 55%. They're more than the men in number, which is a record in Africa. So these are progressive aspects that they can share with us in terms of learning for development purposes. And also in areas where other countries have done better, they can learn. We can learn from the strength as well as the failure of South Africa in the area of social policy and social transfers. But I think, ladies and gentlemen, today one country that we must all learn from is Brazil. In fact, as I speak today, they have lifted about 40 million already out of obsolete poverty. Over 10 years ago, they lifted about 20 million. Today, the number is more like 40 million. And Brazil has established a Brazil-Africa social policy network. Those of you who are directly involved on a day-to-day basis with social policy, please try to tap into that network. And I think it is extremely useful. What they've done is remarkable, and I think it is there's a lot of lessons. And in fact, the guy who was behind it, I'm Ambassador Kamala, he's the one that came to ACP and spoke to us. He's now the Director General of WTO, of FAO. He was the minister in charge of that Bolsa Familia under Lula. It was extremely successful, and in fact, that is what helped him to get the position of Director General of FAO today. And so we have a lot to learn from these experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mailafia. I'll give the floor to Ambassador Kamara. And while he takes the floor, I would like you to start to think of some of the questions you would like to bring forth on practical ways in which we can either learn from each other and following a bit some of that implementation. But we'll come back for a second round of questions real quick.
Well, thank you so much for the challenging questions you have put forward. We might not be having answers, straight answers, but let me point out what we have agreed as East African ambassadors in Brussels. One of the issues we've agreed, you know, when what ambassadors do all over the world, the first thing ambassadors what we normally do, ambassadors always gather information. All ambassadors, the important thing they do is nothing but gathering information. Now, we always do that, but what we've agreed with our colleagues as ambassadors of West Africa, we've agreed that the issue is not only about gathering information, we must always share information. So we have agreed that every month there should be a day when we meet and share what we've gathered and see how we can help our countries. And why have we decided to do that? Recently we signed the EPAs with the European Union, economic partnership agreements are negotiations which have taken a long time to be concluded, over 10 years. Now, immediately after signing, of course, Kenya and other East African countries thought that now, probably before that, there was this what they call sanitary and phytosanitary measures, where here there is an organization on SANCO, European Union organization, and Eurofit. Eurofit is a laboratory based here where they can always tell you, look, we have tested your mangoes, or we have tested your banana, which is because of this. Now, what has surprised everybody, immediately after signing the treaty, the EPAs, there are people who thought that after signing everything will be easy, but after signing the warnings have increased. Now, what does it mean? It means that signing EPAs is not enough and it might not help sometimes to do business. Because if you are told that your mangoes have these problems and that, you don't meet standards, so at the end of the day, you will not sell. So we've agreed as ambassadors to have at least monthly meetings in order to exchange information. Because if Uganda is warned that your products are likely to be in the red zone, Tanzania should get prepared, and Kenya should get prepared as well. So we've agreed on that. We do that in order to help our countries. But the other issue, there are so many international agreements. And these agreements, there are countries which sign agreements but never ratify. So one of the issues we've agreed as ambassadors is to identify important agreements based on what we learn here in Brussels, which our countries signed but have never ratified. If you sign and you don't ratify, it is as good as not having that agreement. But the other issue, I will tell you, for example, which is it was one of the controversial issues in the EPA negotiations. Europeans were telling us that as soon as you sign, you should give automatically, let's say if you are trading among ourselves and other people, the moment we sign EPAs, then whatever good we offer to the third party, we must offer the same to you. Yes. But we advise our partner states, our people in the country that look here, European Union is negotiating with so many people. Then we said, if they are demanding that for you, just tell them that, please, offer to us as well whatever you have offered to the same party.
Exactly.
Then after that, we told Europeans, they said, fine, we will offer you the same. They accepted that. But our people from the capitals were not aware. It was only for us who were in Brussels. But again, then we told the European Union that, look, in Africa, we have a serious problem of limited intra-Africa trade. Then we said, fine, when it comes to the issues, for African countries, they should not stop us from giving among ourselves free trade arrangements or better terms. Then the Europeans agreed that fine. For Africa, there shouldn't be any problem. You can offer whatever you want to offer among yourselves, but it is only for those big, the emerging economies. Then we had an argument. But what's important, Europeans had asked that whatever we offer something, if they sign a free trade areas with somebody, then we must offer the same. Then we said, no, we cannot do that. Eventually, we agreed that we are not going to offer that automatically. We are going to negotiate. But there is another thing which our people from the capital were in disagreement. Because Europeans said, please, you must have transparency when it comes to taxes on how you collect revenue. But our people from the capital were saying, no, that is, you are interfering with their sovereignty. But when they arrived, we said, no, in Europe, everybody pays tax here. And in Europe, if you don't pay tax, you are considered as a bad person. So when Europeans tell you that, please, be transparent in taxes, that's not a bad thing.
Yes.
Then eventually, that issue became clear. I am trying to tell you what we do. But probably to conclude, as I've said, it is a big challenge. We had the Africa-EU summit, and one of the major topics of the summit was investing in people. And it was ambassadors in Brussels who raised their voice to make sure the issue of investing in people is given priority. But if you look at the Africa-EU, one of the agreements, it's about promotion, it's about human rights issues related with making sure that we respect non-discrimination of women, rights of children, and the other things. So eventually, we have agreed with the European Union on those issues. So normally, we have limitations, of course. You as the ambassador, you can always gather information, interpret, communicate to the capital, and encourage countries to ratify those ratifications which we consider important, but our countries might be thinking in order to implement. The advantage we have for ambassadors in Brussels, sometimes we are in a position to think out of the box. Sometimes at the capital, they might interpret everything as a bad thing, but sometimes, we take time to educate them and to let them understand where there are issues of which they should be able to adopt and to be flexible. But our role is educative. It is about telling the capital what is happening in Brussels and what issues they should accept and what issues they should say no. But of importance here is that we've agreed, at least at the level of East African Community, to meet monthly, and at the level of ACP, of course, we do meet. We have different meetings almost every month, the level at the Committee of Ambassadors. So we exchange, but we've agreed as well to be inviting people with special knowledge and expertise to come here in Brussels so that we can share with them in order to understand how is the work going, and thereafter to advise our capitals accordingly. But what we have agreed for issues which we consider critical to our capital, we must advise simultaneously. What does it mean? We must agree that this issue is important for East Africa. For example, let us advise our capital. We send a common message. If I advise my capital, and the Kenya embassy advises the capital as well, and the Burundi and the Uganda, then that one can be taken seriously. But if we advise A and Rwanda advise B, then sometimes at the capital they might not take it seriously. So we are trying to see how we can work together from this end and help our people on the ground. But what is vital when it comes to social policies and the other issues, there are so many protocols and the conventions which are very good, but unfortunately our capitals are yet to sign, to sign and to ratify. So we are trying to see how we can let our people at the level of the capital sign for the agreements and the conventions which are good, but they are yet to be signed, and to ratify for those conventions which we think are good and our countries signed, but have never ratified. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have picked a few pointers there on how we can try and translate some of these social welfare policies that are great on paper, and practically we have had the embassy are really there to make sure they break that information down for back to our nationals and how they can be able to partake of this and understand what they're being proposed to, what is being proposed to them. And I like what Dr. Malafia, you say, that indeed we have a country we can already benchmark with. I think we live here with that assignment of reading further and seeing what they're doing. That is practically, that we can borrow from practical terms, from level of child acts, for instance, that were mentioned by Megan, and to women empowerment programs. I mean, that was a good illustration of a country actually asking you, how are you going to change the life of a woman? Then you qualify for a budget. I think those are good things we can borrow from other states. Now, I'll put one more round of questions before I invite the next guest. Yes, sir? And then Ms. Kawal. Go ahead.
What I take from here, because Dr. Maela here emphasized on the Brazilian model, and quite good, but what I take seriously from there, or what I can see from there, is from the leadership position, because it takes the leader to drive that. So I can imagine that the president of Brazil was personally behind that, otherwise it couldn't succeed as it succeeded. So I think that tells us that leadership is a strong factor here. And that is what we should be emphasizing also to we should look forward or look up to in our countries. Do we have the leadership to be able to drive this? So these protocols, these agreements that we are talking about, they have to be accepted by the leaders, and they have to be internalized by the leaders. If it's not internalized, then that passion to drive it wouldn't be there. So this is something that we really have to watch out for. And then you could have the investment that Dr. Mailafia also said. There has to be investment from the leaders, investment, time, resources, human and structural resources, and also infrastructural investments. But then you have the deadline and the monitoring that was also emphasized. But I then would be seeing here the need for some effective external mechanism or body. And from the diaspora perspective, I see the role of the diaspora organizations in getting this done. Because the diaspora organizations see this from an objective perspective. The embassy, of course, we know is part and parcel of the government. So that if it was possible to also have this structure built in, where you have these independent bodies, external bodies, maybe the diasporas, that are able to influence the governments, for example, the home governments. We know, for example, what applies to Nigeria. I am a Nigerian, so I know what applies to Nigeria. I know what is good for Nigeria. If we have this kind of diaspora bodies for our countries, and they are also empowered, and the governments are also put on that position that they have to listen to what these bodies are saying, it could be a change factor. We happened to have a meeting at the European Union just this last week. He's a friend of mine also in our organization. And then came this explanation on the negotiations between the European Union and Africa. Yes. And some points were put there that I have heard about this from my people in Nigeria, from the Chambers of Commerce in Nigeria. And then what we heard from the European Union officials is a little bit different from what we heard from our people back home. And so there is need for this kind of involvement of some objective bodies like the diaspora organizations in this process. But the question is, can our governments be compelled to accept the interference or the intervention of the diasporas in some of these things, and to be able to be involved in it? If that can be done, if you can have also enforcement framework and legal framework. I heard about the European Union courts kind of situation. I don't quite understand it. If these frameworks are put there, and then you have the diaspora organizations also there to be able to help to push this, and the governments are compelled to listen, I think that some of these changes can take place. Because you need to implement, you need to change things, you need the leadership, and you need the driving force. So I am talking about a good leadership, but I'm talking about a kind of compelling mechanism that puts there the diaspora organizations, for example, and also the legal framework that will be able to get this happen. That is, I'm not asking a question, but it's a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, indeed, we have had great recommendations there. Thank you so much for your intervention. And Collins, I think we will really have to take those on board and be able to share with everyone. Now, let me move quickly into the next session. And with this, I know I wanted to give the floor back to Ms. Emma, but before I can do that, I will just go ahead and invite you to already take the floor on a matter of your own that you actually wanted to present to us. And of course, you can touch on the comment that you had wanted to make in contribution to the previous session. You have the floor, Ms. Kawawa.
Thank you. Well, all of this, most of it has already been said. So I'm just trying to say what is being left out now, because we've been having discussions already. All in all, my point was that we need to put a system whereby when we do this legislative, we do policies, they should be implemented. And normally, if you want to do this, you have to put a task force, a follow-up on all these implementations of all the agreements that we signed. Looking at the social policy, welfare, I would suggest I came up with my own recommendations. Normally, I always believe I say I work on way forward, not how things, the problems, the discussions, the challenges, those everybody knows. Lucky enough, Ambassador has said about Brazil. Brazil has been working very close with ITC. That was my recommendation. We've been working very close with ITC. I attended the 50 years anniversary in Rwanda. Brazil demonstrated a very big role in development in the business world. But what I want to say is that we need to address issues that hinder the implementation of the social policy welfare on ground. And this is where I come in. When we say about on ground, meaning that after signing an AU here, or EU, AU, coming down to the ambassadors, knowing what's going on, taking it to the government, what next? How can you reinforce that? How can that be done in a short time, in a short period? Because this is going to be discussed 20 years, 10 years ago, but it's still not implemented in the right way. Some countries have taken ahead, but some countries are left behind. How? We need to form, this is where I'm coming back, we need to form either in interior body or ministerial body, or whatever body which has got partnership with all stakeholders. We're talking about EU being part, African ambassadors being part of it, the ministerial level, coming down to the ministerial level, coming down, even the partner states. I'm talking about partner organizations, stakeholders, so that it can be implemented and give a frame how it's going to be implemented. I'm talking about this. These are really crucial issues we're talking about. But how long are we going to talk about it instead of implementing it? Child abuse, early marriages, I don't know, gender issues, all this has been talked everywhere. MDGs, I don't know, AU, whatever, all this has been said. And they have been implemented, they're documented. I don't think so we need any more documentation, any more signing. But now, it's a partnering of these organizations and implementation. This is what we should come out from this meeting. Come out with a strategic plan. come out with an action plan, a recommendation for how to implement this. And I would suggest, first, make sure partnering with the key players of the ones who instituted the law, the legislative or the social policy. Partnership with the country, with the nations, and the ambassadors should take the lead. The ambassadors should take the lead because they're the ones here in Brussels who attend all these people. We are the ones behind. And I say, so the ambassadors of each country will be part of it, take the lead, and then go down to the national level, to their countries, presenting with the task force which will be following up, which is being constituted here in Brussels, taking it down to follow up with the time limit, with the monitoring issues, and how it's going to be implemented. I think this is going to be considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kawawa there. Very practical recommendation there. You know, there we have best policy practice that she has already pushed us into. Brazil is successful. Let's learn from that. But also what is important was the role of the embassies. We have a lot of work to do. And indeed, those are going to have to be translated at Ambassador. I understand we will be passing over this information to our ministers who will be here in a month or so. This will be a fantastic recommendation. That indeed we commend them for the work they're doing in getting all these agreements going, but indeed we do want to play a major role in how these things are going to be implemented. Now, I have to give the floor to the next speaker, but before I do, may I allow the other gentleman from the Embassy of Nigeria to make an intervention quickly before we let our Honorary Consul General speak?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. My name is Owu from the Embassy of Nigeria. We have talked so much about policies and implementation of policies to better the life of the people. And you ask a pertinent question on the role of embassy in ensuring that the decisions that are taken, on papers are not just left on the papers. That what is the role of the embassy? On a very lighter note, let me tell you what the role of the embassy is. The role of the embassy is to make sure that those agreements are forwarded to the appropriate authority for implementation, which is what the embassy is doing. But at the same time, it is one thing to advise someone on something. It is another thing for the advice to be right. But in my own view, I will say that we need effective and efficient institutions, because there is no new policy we want to talk about that we don't know. We keep talking about, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. It's all true. But what we need most is the implementation of those policies. And those policies are being implemented by appropriate institutions. So we need effective and efficient institutions, uncorrupt institutions. Because if you come up with a particular policy and you said, okay, this is what we want, after that, you have to go. The president, for instance, will not stand on the road to make sure that police do their no. The police are like institutions, for instance. They've got their role to play. So those institutions need to be strengthened. We need to ensure that they are not corrupt before all these policies that we have, are implemented. That's just a little that I would like to add to what has been said so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to give the floor to our Consul General of the country of Suriname to just share a few comments on this topic as well. Ms. Ruth, you have the floor.
I just need to give you a little introduction to Suriname because I don't know if everybody knows where it is. Have you heard of it? Do you know where it is? Okay, of course, wonderful. It's very small. It's the smallest country in South America, but it's about 163 square kilometers. So it's quite a large country, even though it's the smallest country. And it has a population which, in many of your countries, my country, Nigeria also, would be called a village. It's about 500,000 people. I'll give you a little brief history because you need to know that in the context of the situation now. It was found, shall we say, by the British in the 17th century, and along with the rest of the Caribbean, it became a slave colony. And the Dutch and the British used to have their countries, and one day the British said, you know what, you've got a little island just off the coast of America, we've got all of America, can we have that island if we give you Suriname? And they swapped. And that island is Manhattan, which is why it's now called New York, and Suriname became a Dutch colony. Eventually slavery ended, and the blacks who were slaves said, we're not going to work anymore. So the Dutch went to the British and said, you know, we've got all this food, and we can't produce it anymore. Do you have anybody to help us? And the Dutch gave them Indians, Chinese, people from Java, and that's where the population is now, with 6 distinct peoples, including the Amerindians, who are the original people. In 1975, they got independence from Holland. And they're very, very lucky. They have their own airline. They have great infrastructure. They have more roads than Spain in such a small country for such a small population. They have, for the most part, pretty good housing. They have secured themselves by damming, making the largest dam in the world, man-made dam in the world, called the Brokopondo Dam, if you want to look and see where it is. Electricity, which is constant. And everything is pretty rosy there. They did have a little altercation and they had a little coup, as it happens, and that led to a civil war where a lot of things got broken up, but now they're back to good governance, shall we say. And they have very, very good systems in place, including good social security. The main issue, I would say, is that they have, because of the slavery and because of the history of the people, they have a lot of single-parent families. There's a lot of orphans, or children that know, oh, my father's this one, but he has 100 children, and this is normal. This can be normal for some people. And they have a lot of different wives and so on and so forth. So that is an issue. But for the rest of it, they've got pretty good health care. They do suffer from the usual things such as diabetes, high blood pressure, kidney failure, due to the food that they eat, because there's abundance of food. There's no issue with food. My part for being in Israel, I wanted them to be able to be more productive in the food because they have good foreign currency. The GDP is about 10 billion. So that means that on average, each person is earning $10,000 a year. That is not really the case. Some people are earning 5. But they are all earning something. The main issues for social things, as I said, were the family situations. The Indians, the Chinese, the Amerindians, the Dutch, original Dutch people there, they all keep their families kind of small. But unfortunately, those of African heritage tend to think, oh, let me have one here, let me have one there, and therefore it's not the best situation. It is what it is. It is what it is. And a lot of people, the young men especially, they're all big, strong guys coming from Africa, coming from Gambia originally, coming from Ghana originally, coming from Nigeria originally, as slaves. They chose the strongest and the best, and the ones that have survived. If you survive the slave ship, and you survive the first year on the plantation of hard labor and work, then the children of those offspring are going to be very strong naturally. And these people are young and they want to work, And the issue is that they don't have enough to keep them busy. So you have situations where they say, I'm going to go to Holland, or I'm going to go to America, or I'm going to do drugs, or something like that. Take drugs with me. So you've got a lot of that issue. There are problems of drug abuse, some amazingly dramatic violence, domestic violence that you get there, which is almost unbelievable. I remember one time I went to a print shop to print my business cards. Spoke to the lady at the shop, everything's fine, and I walk out, I say I collect them on Friday, she says yes, it'll be fine. And then you're walking up to the print shop on the Friday, and you're seeing all these police, and the police don't do anything usually, they're just hanging around saying, hi, how are you? The wife, the husband of the lady had decided that he didn't like the fact that she wanted to leave him. And he just came into the store and stabbed her to death. In broad daylight, in front of everybody. And she has children, of course. And it's that kind of, it's massive, when it's violent, it's very violent. And that's an issue. And I think that's to do with how people are feeling in the community. But those are the main issues, the drugs, the single parents, and the dramatic violence. But for the rest, they are very, very fortunate. They have very good hospitals, great infrastructure, great healthcare, good accommodation, power, which makes a big difference. If you know that you don't have to go too far to get every morning to get water, to get petrol, to get all these things, it makes a big difference. And over taxation, someone was saying about taxation, there's taxation there, but it's very little. And they really are encouraging businesses to thrive and to grow there. They have oil, they have bauxite, they have gold, they have diamonds. Such a small country, so they're very, very fortunate. I know it's very different for African countries, because although African countries have these things also, the population is so much bigger. We have 190 million people in Nigeria. It's different. And the thing with Suriname is, although we have oil there, straight away when they found the oil, they built the refineries. And he talks about, one last thing I'll say, the ambassador talked about European Union giving quotas on how the mangoes must be and how the oranges must be. One thing I've learned about these things is you've got to do it yourself. Israel follows what the Europeans say, but there's a wonderful institute called the Volcani Institute in Israel. And anytime I get somebody from Nigeria or from wherever, I make sure I take them to this place. It's almost a secret. They don't like me when I call them and say, I've got someone who wants to come and see you. And they're like, oh, we're busy. I say, no, 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 you're not busy. This is the ambassador of such and such. And I've told them all about you. You've got to let them in. And there you will find that they're not so much interested in just growing the food. They're looking at how to package the food. They're looking to see if they put it in a rubber container, is it going to last longer? Then you can see how to keep an orange or an apple for 2 years. It's to do with power, with, you said food security, infrastructure, good governance. If you have food security, if you want food security, you also have to know how to take care of the food once it's grown. And that's, it's very crucial. Agriculture is the basis for all industry. Because if you grow a tomato, as Megan was telling me, they're all coming from House Estate to the southeast of Nigeria. If you grow a tomato and you have a glut, you know you're going to have a glut of tomatoes. Not everybody's going to want them. Then you build the cannery. Then you've got another industry. and then this cannery can export to somewhere else. You can make your own rules for Africa and say, in Africa, we want tomatoes like this, we want mangoes like this. You've got your own market. Don't bother looking too far to Europe. 190 million people. You can't sell mangoes to 190 million people? It's already a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There is something we can pick from that, from Israelis and Suriname, certainly. Now, I know our time is running out and we're almost at the close, and we have captured all these recommendations that have passed across from institutions to institutional structures and awareness that we have talked about. But let me conclude with a line that I picked from one of our presidents that I'm really watching for. And this is President Paul Kagame. He just attended the conference in the US on the IMF and World Bank Summit. And he made our leaders understand something. He said this to them: building blocks for what we want to achieve are already there. How do we move from ideas to implementation and put resources to be where we need them to be? And I think this is actually the concluding line for this part. We've had from the pilot projects, awareness, using all our resources, doing it ourselves. This is part of the resources. How do we get to use them and put them where they should be? And that will help us move away from ideas, policies, and signing of all these international agreements and paper kind of policies to practical ways. Thank you, Collins.
Thank you so very much, Doreen, and thank you, everyone, for your very incisive